This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Welcome to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and today I am in my hotel room in Austin, Texas. I'm in Austin because I am speaking at the Sheet Metal and Air Conditioning Contractors National Association Convention. It's their 75th anniversary, so congratulations to them. You may know them better as SMACNA. And I'd like to give a shout out to Angie Simon. She is the president of Western Allied Mechanical out of Menlo Park in California. She's been a guest on my podcast, and Western Allied is a valued client. And Angie is going to be inaugurated as the first woman president of SMACNA tomorrow morning. And so congratulations to Angie. You've had a tremendous positive impact upon the construction industry, and it is a well-deserved honor that you are entering into. Is it possible for a construction company to struggle and even go out of business in a booming economy? I have a friend who has years of experience in construction, working his way up from the field to running crews, being a superintendent, and now he is in estimating and he runs large projects. He's highly competent, he's trustworthy, and he's incredibly hardworking. Yet last week, he was let go by the company he had worked with for a number of years. Why did this happen? It happened because of one bad job. The company is in a tight spot with over $1 million of retention owed to them and $2 million of accounts receivable. And the bad job that they were counting on for cash flow to pay salary and take care of their accounts payable is being argued over by lawyers. You can guess the rest, right? The bank called in their line of credit. They were unable to get bonding for the big work my friend bids on, and reluctantly the owner of the company let him go. Despite the difficulty of being let go, my friend left his position with his head held high. He had given his best effort to the organization, he had done his duty, and his morale was strong. Welcome to Construction Genius, episode 42. In today's episode, we are going to explore the topic of morale, what it is, the three foundations of morale, and how you can build and sustain morale in your organization. We'll be drawing on the wisdom of Field Marshal Bill Slim from his book, Defeat into Victory, which we previously covered in episode 38. So if you haven't listened to episode 38 yet, you can always go back afterwards and listen to that as well. It's excellent. The book is all about how the British Army recovered from being beaten badly by the Japanese in Burma in 1942, how they rebuilt their army, regained their confidence, and eventually defeated the Japanese in 1945. And specifically in this episode, I'll be reading brief excerpts from Chapter 9, which is called The Foundation. So, as I said, there's three things that we're going to take a look at. What morale is, the three foundations of morale, and how you can build and sustain morale in your organization. First, let's look at what morale is and why it is important. I'm going to read from the book here. Morale is a state of mind. It is that intangible force which will move a whole group of men to give their last ounce to achieve something, without counting the cost to themselves, that makes them feel that they are part of something greater than themselves. Let's break this down here a little bit. First, Bill Slim said that morale is a state of mind. It is the confidence or the enthusiasm, even the discipline of a person or a group at a particular time. And that's one thing I want you to notice right away, is that morale is a dynamic. It is only present in the present. And it is something that must be sustained. That confidence, enthusiasm, and discipline must be sustained over a long period of time if your company is going to be successful. You, as a leader, are responsible for the morale of those whom you lead. Whether you're the company leader, whether you're a division leader, whether you're leading a project team, whatever the case may be, you are responsible for the morale of your organization. And you'll notice what Bill Slim said. It is an intangible force. It's not something that you can touch, but you know when it's there. Think about watching your favorite sports team on television, right? You can tell the state of their morale by things like their body language. As they walk off the field, their heads are held high, their shoulders are back, they have a confident look or a determined look in their eyes. You can tell by their body language what the state of their morale is. You can often tell morale by the words that people use, whether they use positive words that express that determination and that confidence, or whether they use negative words. You can tell by their actions. Teams that have high morale show up before they're supposed to show up, and teams that have low morale, they tend to show up late. Teams that have high morale, the quality of their work is consistently excellent. Teams that have low morale, their quality of work goes up and down. Morale is something so important because it moves a group of people to do great things. And specifically, as Bill Slim says, to give their last ounce to achieve something. The soccer team that I coach, it's a rec soccer team. It's a under 14 boys team. And one of the things that we do at the end of practices is we run sprints. And when they're running sprints, I'm always asking them to give their best effort. And that's what you see in high morale teams. High morale teams are always giving their best effort because they want to be able to walk off the field or come home from working all day and be able to look themselves in the mirror and say, I gave my best effort. It's really interesting. I was listening to Kyle Shanahan give his post-game interview. Kyle Shanahan is the coach of the San Francisco 49ers. I'm a die-hard Niners fan. It's the only sport where I'll watch the Niners even if they suck. And I sit in front of the TV on a Sunday, right, and yell at the TV screen. If you like the NFL, you probably know what I'm talking about. Anyway, right now the San Francisco 49ers are 6-0. As I'm recording this, they're undefeated in the season. And as you might guess, their morale is sky high. But like I said earlier, morale is a dynamic thing. And Kyle Shanahan always makes an emphasis on is that in his preparation and in his team's preparation for each game that they play every week, they're always focused on getting better because this is what he says, you're either getting better or you're getting worse. There's no static in the NFL. There's no standing still in one place. And that's the same with morale. Either your morale is improving or it's declining. It's not a static thing. And so it's very, very important that you're always monitoring the morale of your organization and seeking to improve that morale. Going back to this definition of morale, he talks about giving the last ounce to achieve something. And then this next phrase is very important here, without counting the cost to themselves. Do you have people in your organization who are always counting the cost? It's interesting. In the Gospel of Matthew, it says, when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And the idea behind that verse is that we should be unconscious in our giving. And high morale organizations, they have a certain joyful, cheerful ignorance about the cost of what they're doing because they are so into doing a great job. They have such high morale that they freely give of their energy and their efforts. And there isn't this idea of a consciousness about it where they're giving and then they're always expecting something in return right away. They aren't looking for accolades or a pat on the back. People with high morale are cheerful. They're doing their job, they're enjoying it, and high morale teams are generous and cheerful. And this is something that you must cultivate in your business. And another aspect of morale is it makes people feel that they're a part of something greater than themselves. And this is something that every human being longs for, is a transcendent cause to commit themselves to find meaning in. And we know in this world there are many unhealthy transcendent causes. But the great thing about business is that business is a healthy transcendent cause. And it's very, very important that you, as a leader in your organization, establish and maintain and grow morale in your organization by tying the efforts of the people in your company to something greater than themselves. And I'm going to dive into that in a little more detail later on. Now, we've discussed what morale is. Let's now look at the second aspect, the three foundations of morale. I'm going to read from the book, Morale Must, if it is to endure, and the essence of morale is that it should endure, have certain foundations. These foundations are spiritual, intellectual, and material. And that is the order of their importance. Spiritual first, because only spiritual foundations can stand real strain. Next, intellectual, because men are swayed by reason as well as feeling. Material last, important, but last, because the very highest kinds of morale are often met when material conditions are lowest. So we're going to look at each one of those aspects, the spiritual, the intellectual, and the material. One of the keys to being a successful leader is deepening your understanding of human nature. That's why it's so important for you to read books on history, books on philosophy. There's so much great information, deep knowledge that you can draw upon to enhance your understanding of people and to enable you to be a more effective leader. And I think that's so important when we consider the three foundations of morale. So the first one we're going to look at is spiritual. Every human being has a spirit. If you look in into biblical wisdom, the idea of the makeup of a human being is that every human has a spirit, they have a soul, and they have a body. And their spirit is that which relates to the transcendent, to the deep. Their soul is that which relates to other people. And their body, obviously, is that which interacts with their environment. So it's important that you have a framework for understanding human beings if you're going to maximize your impact as a leader. So let's go back to the book because it's important for the sake of the podcast here, this episode, to define what Bill Slim means by spiritual. I use the word spiritual not in its strictly religious meaning, but as belief in a cause. Religion has always been and still is one of the greatest foundations of morale, especially of military morale. Saints and soldiers have much in common. Yet religion, as we understand it, is not essential to high morale. Anyone who has fought with or against Nazi paratroops, Japanese suicide squads, or Russian commissars will have found this. But a spiritual foundation, belief in a cause, there must be. Now, this is very, very interesting, right? Because you see, every human being is spiritual. The only question is there spiritual energy directed in a positive way or a negative way? We will lock on to something that is transcendent, something that is beyond us. But is it something that is positive or is it something that is negative? And so later on in the book, Bill Slim breaks down what he means by a spiritual foundation. And so I'm going to go through these phrases and explain them a little bit. So there must be a great and noble object. That is one of the essences of this spiritual foundation. And so what is the great and noble object of your business? Great businesses define this and they live it out. I'll give you an example. Walmart, they define their noble object as giving ordinary people the chance to buy the same things as rich people. Now, that may not be your impression of Walmart, but that's what they say is their great and noble object. Nike's great and noble object is to experience the emotion of competition and crushing competitors. Now, you may not think that's very noble, but it's definitely transcendent, this idea of embracing competition and thriving in the midst of competition and living for competition. Think about Southwest Airlines. Their purpose is to democratize air travel. It transcends everything that they do. It is a great and noble object. And only spiritual foundations can be sustained over a long period of time. That's why some businesses can't go from one generation to the next, because that spiritual drive, that great and noble object that the founders had, doesn't drip down to the next generation. What is your great and noble object? What is the purpose of your organization? What is driving you in what you do? That is something that you must define. The next way that he talks about these spiritual foundations is that the achievement of that great and noble object must be vital. What was vital to Bill Slim and his troops in 1942, 1943 was the defeat of Japan. It was a vital cause. And think about this. Business is vital. I'm going to read you a quote here from William Feather. Business demands faith, it compels earnestness, it requires courage, is honestly selfish, is penalized for mistakes, and it is the essence of life. That great and noble cause, its achievement must be vital. So let me ask you this. How committed are you to the achieving of that noble cause? Is it something that's vital? Is it something that if it doesn't get done, it would have a devastating effect upon you? Business is not something that we can casually enter into, particularly a construction business where the risks are so intense, where if you're the owner of the business, you're signing your name on the contract, and that has a tremendous impact on you both professionally and personally, depending on how the project goes. You must be able to identify that noble cause, and the achievement of that noble cause must be vital to you. The next thing he talks about in terms of the spiritual foundation is that the method of achievement must be active and aggressive. High morale teams are always active and aggressive in pursuing their noble cause. And that's one of the great things about construction. It's not a passive business. It's not a reactionary business. You're not sitting around waiting for the phone to ring and then picking it up, right? You're going out there and you're hustling work. And once you've hustled work, you're bidding the work. And once you're bidding the work and you've won it, you've got to be active and intense in planning the work. And then you've got to get out there and you've got to build the work. And then, of course, you've got to get around and chase the money. So the method of achievement must be active and aggressive. And that's a positive thing. It's a positive thing to be active and aggressive in a good thing. And then he goes on to say, the man must feel that what he is and what he does matters directly towards the attainment of the object. And it's very interesting when you think about an army, because in an army, there are the folks who are fighting on the front line, but there's tons of other people behind the lines who are doing a variety of other things other than sweating, bleeding, and dying in order to support those folks who are on the front line. And I'm sure you can see the analogy there between an army and construction, because you have your folks who are in the field. I'm looking out my window right now, and there's a number of projects going on, and guys are up on the roof, and they're installing work here. There's cranes moving around, all that kind of stuff here in Austin. And you know that behind all those folks building, there's people back at the office supporting their work. And those people in the office are absolutely vital to the achieving of the great and noble aim of those construction companies, just as much as the people in the field are. And it's important that everyone sees the contribution that everyone has to make. And this can be tricky in terms of morale, because it's interesting, right? Because you can have a guy come off a job site after a hard day's work, And even if that job is losing money, he can look himself in the mirror and say, hey, I worked as hard as I could. I did an excellent job. And then the office, on the other hand, is looking at the results from the job. They're looking at the daily reports and they're seeing how it's struggling, and their morale can be very low. And so there's this morale dynamic. There can be these morale silos within a construction company that you as a leader, particularly if you are responsible in an executive role for not only what the field is doing, but for what the office is doing, you're responsible to manage morale throughout the organization. So it's important that you identify those silos of morale and that you make sure that every person must feel that what they're doing matters directly towards the attainment of that noble object. We've looked at the first foundation, which is spiritual. And I encourage you to clearly define the great and noble object of your business and allow that to drive you. Let's go back to the book and see what Bill Slim says about that intellectual foundation. The first thing he says, referring to his troops, is that he must first be convinced that the object can be attained, that it is not out of reach. I remember when I was a kid, like many of you, I wanted to be a professional athlete. And I started playing rugby when I was about 12 years old. And I was a fairly good rugby player at the level that I was playing at. And then one day I got selected to play for the city team, the city that I lived in. And I started playing for that team. And the level of competition just increased quite substantially. And I realized that I wasn't that good of a rugby player. And my object of becoming a professional athlete was out of my reach because I lacked the capability. And once I was convinced of that in my mind, then the spiritual foundation of wanting to be that professional athlete was no longer relevant. Intellectually, I understood it wasn't possible, and I moved on to something else. So that's very important when you set out that noble object. The people who work for you, they must be convinced that that object can be attained and that it is not out of reach. Your folks must be convinced that profit on a project is possible. They may be on a project and it hasn't gone well, and that loser mentality can set in. And you can hear your guys talking about, the GC sucks, or the subs suck, or the project's impossible, the owner sucks, the office sucks, the field sucks. Everyone's complaining, right? That's where you have to be able to step in and establish that what you're asking them to do is possible. Because just because they're saying it's impossible, it doesn't mean that it can't be obtained. But you have to do the job of convincing them that it is possible. The second thing about this intellectual foundation is that he must see, too, that the organization to which he belongs and which is striving to attain the object is an efficient one. You might have guys and gals working on projects, and they look at the project, they've built a project like that before, they know that they can make money on it, but they're hindered from making money because your organization isn't efficient. And to be efficient means to achieve maximum productivity with a minimum wasted effort or expense. Is your organization efficient? Let me give you some examples of that. For instance, is the communication between the field and the office efficient? Does the office get the field what they need and the field get the office what they need? Is communicating information something that flows smoothly in your organization, or is it something where balls are being dropped all over the place? What about the procedures that you use to build your projects? Are they efficient? Do they make the best use of time and material, or do they need some work? What about when you make mistakes? Are you able to fix those mistakes in an efficient way and not make those same mistakes over and over again? You see, you will frustrate your people if you set them a noble object, and if they see that they can obtain it, but because of the inefficiency in your organization, it's just not possible to get there. That will cause morale to dip. Here's another aspect of that intellectual foundation. He must have confidence in his leaders and know that whatever dangers and hardships he is called upon to suffer, his life will not be lightly flung away. Great construction leaders value every single person who works for them in their organization. That's why we demand safety on our jobs, right? We must minimize the dangers, obviously, but we can't always minimize the hardships. Construction's a hard business. Sometimes it requires people to work many long hours, to spend time away from their families. And the people in your organization, they must know that you care for them. And the only way they're going to know that you care for them is if you communicate that to them consistently in your words and in your deeds. So you see, morale has that spiritual foundation. It has that intellectual foundation. So there's a grand cause, and there's a confidence within the people in your organization that that cause can be obtained, and that the leadership cares for them, and that the company is the type of company that's efficient and able to get stuff done. And that leads to the last foundation, which is the material foundation. I'll go back and talk about Slim's definition of material. He says this: the man must feel that he will get a fair deal from his commanders and from the army generally. It's really interesting in armies. A lot of times there's a long way between the supply depot and the front line. The front line where people are sweating and dying and bleeding, and the supply depot where all the goods are coming in order to supply the front line. And the whole organization of an army is designed to get what the front line needs so that the front line can fight the battles and be victorious. The same is true in your construction company. Your construction company's whole focus should be on getting the field whatever they need in order to execute projects profitably. And your folks in the field particularly, they must feel that they're getting a fair deal from the folks in the office, that they're getting everything that they need in order to execute the project, that the folks in the office understand that they're in a supportive role, and that there is not a siphoning away of supplies and resources for the comforts of the office, and the field then is being neglected as a result of that. So in your company, I want to encourage you, don't be extravagant in terms of the way your office is set up. Obviously, you want it to look nice for clients and things like that, but this is construction, right? We're building buildings, and the whole focus should be on making sure the field has everything that it needs. Another aspect of this material foundation that Bill Slim talks about is this: he must, as far as humanly possible, be given the best weapons and equipment for his task. And the same is true in construction. Morale is going to dip in the field if they understand that they have subpar equipment and subpar supplies. If they know they're being neglected, it's very, very difficult to maintain that morale on a long-term basis. That doesn't mean that you don't make do when times are tight with that which isn't maybe the best. It doesn't mean that you just throw away equipment after one or two uses. Of course not. You maintain your equipment and you take care of your equipment. The point is that, as far as humanly possible, you must give them the best stuff in the field so that they can execute the projects. You must give folks in the office the best stuff too, if you can. Now again, don't be extravagant. Don't be unnecessary. But don't neglect what you're able to provide them, because if you can provide them the best according to your capacity, then that will have a positive impact on your morale. The last aspect of the material portion of the foundation of morale is that his living and working, obviously in the army, when you're fighting on the front lines, your working conditions aren't necessarily going to be great. And sometimes in construction, the same is true. Okay, you're out on the front lines building a project, and it's tough, it's dirty, it's difficult, it's challenging. But you must make those conditions as good as you can. And when a construction company is going through good times, you want to make sure that you share those good times with everyone in the organization. And when they're going through bad times, you want to equally share those bad times. So in other words, the way they do it in the army is that if the folks in the field are getting half rations, then I tell you, the people behind the lines, the officers, they should be getting half rations as well. You shouldn't be fat and happy in the office if folks in the field are suffering. Do you understand what I'm talking about here? You're responsible for the morale of your whole organization, and you cannot neglect one over the other. And in fact, you should always emphasize the importance of the field. The field is vital to your success, because if your field isn't successful, then you won't be able to make any money on a long-term basis. Okay, so first we've explored what morale is. Then we discussed the three foundations of morale. And finally, we're going to look at how to build and sustain morale in your organization. Number one, you must get the leadership team on the same page. Whether your leadership team is large or small, you must be all on the same page about the spiritual aspects of the company particularly. You have to sit down and you have to ask your guys and gals, what is the cause? Why are we here? Why do we go through all of this difficulty? And you need to clearly define that transcendent cause that people will commit their lives to. You're really looking to get that in a business, right? You're looking to get people to commit their working lives to a higher cause. You have to get on the same page in terms of the mental aspects of the organization. And when I say that, I'd like to just point this out. You've got to get on the same page in terms of your strategy. How are we going to fight these battles? How are we going to win the war of business? Get on the same page in terms of what right client, right location, right job type is. And then in terms of the material aspects of the company, you've got to come to an agreement as a leadership team on where resources should be allocated. What's most important right now? You have to be on the same page that the field is vital to our success, and we're going to concentrate on making sure the field has everything that they need within our ability to execute their projects successfully. And it's interesting because morale is a function of the quality of your leadership, and your leadership is responsible for the morale of your organization. And that starts at the executive level, out into the field to your project managers, your superintendent, and your foreman. And those in between, on the front lines, reporting up and down the chain of command, they all bear responsibility for the morale of those that they lead. So you've got to get on the same page in terms of those foundational aspects of morale. And then you have to train your people up. One of the reasons why people lack morale is because they're not confident in their ability. So be careful in your selection of the teams that you build. And as you know, in our current economy where labor is extremely short, your team sometimes is often only as strong as your weakest link. And so you've got to be able to build those teams and train up your people. As you're looking to build morale, and this was one of the insights from the book, what Bill Slim focused on was instead of getting his guys together, giving them a bit of training, and then throwing them into a massive battle against the Japanese, what he focused on was getting small wins. He would send out a patrol to go and sort of mess with the Japanese a little bit and come back with some trophies of war. And there would be a little bit of confidence as a result of that victory, just that one night patrol. And then other people would start volunteering for the patrols. And he would build slowly through a number of small victories in order to get to those big victories. He would build their competence fighting in the jungle. He would build their confidence, and he would build their desire to engage with the enemy. And that's one thing that you're always looking to do by getting some small wins under your belt, is to build your team's competence, their confidence, and their desire to take on tough tasks. One thing that you could do is look at the projects that you're picking out and ask, what are some projects that we could execute at the moment where we could get some small wins? Some small wins to build the confidence and the morale of our team, to get some of our young guys out there and give them some battle action, so to speak, so that they build their competency. And as you're getting those small wins, make sure you're telling your stories of those wins. Make sure that when you win a bid, that you're going around the office and bragging about it and telling how you won that bid. Or when you perform well on a tough job, make sure that you're publicizing it throughout the organization. That massively boosts. What that does is it massively boosts morale. And so not only do you have to train up your people, not only do you have to get on the same page as a leadership team and get some wins under your belt, but then you need to consistently communicate as a leadership group. And this is one of the keys in terms of building morale, particularly if your company is suffering at the moment. You as the leader, get out of your office, go visit the job sites, go look your guys and gals in the eyes, shake their hands, let them know that you're in it for the long haul. Let them know that there's a transcendent cause that they can buy into. Don't just send out an email announcing a new initiative, but send the email out and then back it up with your personal appearance. And as you're interacting with folks, make sure that you're adapting yourself to their particular needs. The way that folks in the field talk are different from the way that the folks in the office talk. So make sure that you're adapting yourself. Another thing you can do is you can be straight up about failures, particularly in leadership, that might impact morale. It's very important that in order to establish morale, that you admit to any mistakes that you have made which might have damaged morale. Your people will deeply appreciate it. And that in terms of your communication, make sure that you're specific in your recognition of the folks who are doing the hard work that's resulting in success, that is getting your wins, because that will help to sustain morale. We've looked at the three aspects of morale, what it is, the three foundations of morale, and how you can build and sustain morale in your organization. As you look at your company, you may see that morale is perhaps not where you want it to be, but you don't have time to go out there and communicate to your folks and touch the people in your organization in the way that you'd like. Perhaps you're not clear on the spiritual foundations of your organization, or specifically the strategies you're going to implement to get things done successfully, which will result in morale increasing. I want to encourage you just to stop for a moment and take complete responsibility for the morale of those that you lead, because it is your responsibility, whether the morale is high or the morale is low. I'd like to go back to my friend, the one who got let go from the construction company last week. It's really cool because he got 3 offers right away from other people in the industry. You know that construction is a small world, right? And when one thing happens, everybody hears. And if you're good help, then you're going to get offers real quick. And he was able to pick the one that best suited him. And he's looking forward to continuing his career with the new company. And I know that he will continue to make a positive contribution to that organization because of his high morale. So let me give you some next steps here. Number 1, realize that you are responsible for the morale of your organization or of those that you lead. I know I've repeated that a number of times, but again, we just have to be able to take responsibility for that. So be clear on the foundations of your business. That's a next step that you can take also. The third next step is get on the same page with other leaders in your organization. Understand that this idea of morale, it trickles down from the top to the bottom of the organization and then back up. It's a dynamic thing that needs to infuse the entire company. The fourth thing you can do is visit your people regularly and communicate with them that transcendent cause, and make sure that they're getting what they need in order to execute projects successfully, in order to achieve that transcendent cause. And then ask them if there's any issues that are not being addressed that affect morale. And listen carefully when they tell you what those issues are so that you can do something about them. And as a takeaway for you, in the show notes, there's a link to my website, ericanderton.com/morale, MORALE. I put together this outline of morale in a 1-page PDF. Download that, and I would encourage you to print it out, give it to each one of your executive team members, and sit down with them and have a discussion about morale. Or perhaps you're a project manager or a project executive running a project at the moment that's not going well, morale is low, and you need to get your superintendent and your project engineers and your foreman together and have a discussion about morale. And you can use the PDF as an outline for that discussion. I really appreciate you listening to this show. What I'd ask you to do is that if you like the show and find it valuable, please go to where you get your podcasts and give us a rating, a review. Because if you do that, what the algorithms do is they say, man, Construction Genius must be awesome. And they promote it more and more on the search engines when people are looking for construction leadership podcasts. So you know how it goes, right? I'd really appreciate it if you did that. And thank you so much for listening. Please share this with other people. Feel free to give me any feedback on LinkedIn. You can find me there regarding the show if you have any suggestions for how I can make it better or for topics that you'd like me to cover. Thanks again for listening. Have a terrific week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings.
Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.